Welcome back, America. We're here with Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Tom Cotton, there's this infamous case where the New York Times got very upset over your op-ed, and people were fired and all the rest because you weren't towing the party line. Remind America what took place.
Yeah, Mark. Back in the summer of 2020, during the BLM riots, I published an op-ed in the New York Times that said if local law enforcement was unable, or in some cases unwilling, thanks to Democratic mayors, to stop the violence, the looting, the arson, then we should use federal troops to restore order. Just the way we did, for instance, in 1991 during the Rodney King riots. This has happened periodically throughout this country. And of course, the New York Times newsroom melted down over the fact that the New York Times leadership would publish that. Then the leadership caved and they fired their executive editor for their opinion pages. They even attached an editor's note to it, although I point out they still have never claimed that there's a single error in my op-ed at the time. They claimed it didn't meet their standards, which I agree, it didn't meet their very low standards. It far exceeded those standards. And in fact, today, Mark, given the Democratic crime wave you have all across America, you now see Democratic politicians in areas like Washington, D.C., yes, calling for the troops to be sent in to restore law and order. But it's just an example of how the media doesn't want to hear alternative voices, and many more people in the media, so-called reporters and journalists, if their newspaper or their TV station even puts on an alternative voice, which for them is anyone to the right of center, they will march in protest and rise up and try to overthrow the leadership of their organizations. That's one reason, as you say, that we have unfreedom of the press in this country, because the media simply marches in lockstep with the progressive left.
You mentioned National Guardsmen, and that, of course, some cities now are asking for National Guardsmen. And President Trump offered National Guardsmen to Nancy Pelosi and others in the Democrat Party, the mayor of Washington, D.C., I believe it was on January 4th, 48 hours before January 6th, by my calculation. And according to independent interviews and records, the acting Secretary of Defense was there when he said it. The head of the Joint Chiefs was there when he said it. The Chief of Staff to the acting head of the Defense Department said it. And it was all ignored by the January 6th committee. It's all ignored by everybody else. He was the one who offered 10,000 armed National Guardsmen, that's Army, to surround the Capitol building, and the Democrats said no. And every piece of information that committee collected related to anything like that has been destroyed. Does that not sound like some kind of a Stalinist operation? Have you ever heard of anything like this?
Yeah, Mark, I think it's pretty well established that Nancy Pelosi did not want any kind of armed presence around the Capitol. I think it goes back in part to the summer of 2020, if you recall, because Washington, D.C. is not a state, thank goodness, and it should never be a state. President Trump was able to send in federal law enforcement, for instance, to stop the rioting in Lafayette Square right across from the White House, or to protect monuments and memorials on our National Mall. But Nancy Pelosi didn't want to see a repeat of those visuals on January 6th. Something, again, that is very common for high-profile events like inaugurations or States of the Union, or big events in state capitals like state inaugurals. Very common, yet Nancy Pelosi didn't want them. And the January 6th committee was not a legitimate committee trying to figure out exactly what had happened that day and the events leading up to that day. It was simply yet another effort to get Donald Trump to do with a one-sided committee what they haven't been able to do in past elections, which is stop not just Donald Trump, but stop the Republican Party from winning majorities.
And in the short time we have left, you're on this Judiciary Committee. You see Merrick Garland has to be the most intellectually corrupt Attorney General in American history. On the one hand, how he protects Joe Biden, the crooked deals they're trying to cut with Hunter Biden in order to protect Joe Biden. On the other hand, he brings this guy back from The Hague, where he was sent because of his disastrous record and his sleazy tactics as a prosecutor. They bring him back from The Hague, the one guy out of all the lawyers, 1 million lawyers in the country, and they unleash him on Donald Trump. It violates so many of his due process civil liberties. On the one hand, you have the Bidens. On the other hand, you have Trump. This is all orchestrated by the Attorney General of the United States, no?
Yeah, Merrick Garland is the worst and perhaps the most corrupt Attorney General we've had in the history of the United States. I mean, he's lied repeatedly to Congress about his role, for instance, in sicking the Department of Justice on parents protesting at school boards, or why he didn't direct the marshals to arrest left-wing street militias protesting outside the homes of Supreme Court justices, why he doesn't pursue zealously left-wing criminals who are firebombing pro-life crisis pregnancy centers. And as you say, he brought a rabid zealot, Jack Smith, back from The Hague to pursue Donald Trump. Much like the chief of the secret police for Stalin, this is a man who acts on the principle, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. Yet he gives special counsel status to a U.S. attorney who's been investigating Hunter Biden, who let statutes of limitations on serious crimes lapse, who is willing to offer him total immunity for all of his past sins that he just couldn't slip by a federal judge in Delaware. The double standard here is clear.
All right, Senator, I want to thank you for all you do. You were a patriot before you're elected, and you're a patriot now as a senator. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, Mark.